used to be able to own market share for decades. You know, all the Jack Welch rules of the 20th century. To be honest, I think every one of those are obsolete. Not because they were bad or dumb at the time, but the entire environment that corporations have to exist in has changed. And so what this means, this long litany of what's happened to companies, means that companies need to be able to do continuous innovation. Not innovation by exception or innovation every 15 years, but innovation needs to be baked into the DNA of a corporation, and that is incredibly hard, and ironically became harder in the last 10 or 15 years rather than easier. And I'm happy to tell you why, but...
Why?
Why? Why, Steve?
Yeah,
Thanks
why?
for asking.
Yeah.
So a couple of things, and this one again came from what I heard it in a Clayton Christensen speech, and it truly set up a light bulb for me I didn't understand, which was, you know, in the last decade when cash was free, companies were essentially still focused on return on net assets and managed to jettison all the things that would make return on net assets look bad. So we shut down R&D labs, we shut down manufacturing, we shut down all this stuff that actually is the core of innovation. We no longer have that. In fact, and I'm going to generalize, but it's probably not too far from the truth, most companies are just kind of financial structures with distribution channels and maybe marketing arms. Yet in the 21st century, we actually, to compete, need those core things back. But we typically have CEOs who are finance types or legal people, and our boards are stuffed with those, and we're the product people. They're sitting in like the Pearl River Valley. And so it's not that we don't know how to do this, but we need to kind of restart the innovation engine. That's one. The other problem is that we've gotten really, really good in the last 10 or 20 years about making execution pristine in the large companies. We have KPIs. We have, you know, processes and procedures and incentive programs. And in fact, all those processes and procedures that make execution efficient strangle innovation in its crib. It's a big idea. You're some like buddy in the bottom of the organization trying to raise your hand and say innovation, and they go to page 412 on the HR manual and say, oh, that's not in your job description. And they'll laugh. I mean, that stuff happens. And so what we're starting to see today is kind of corporations trying to kickstart some of this stuff up again, and for the first time, which didn't exist in the 90s when Christensen was writing an Innovator's Dilemma, and people were doing smart things as well about thinking about corporate innovation, is we now have kind of a set of tools for startups that didn't exist before. That is, we could now take some of these lean startup tools and say, how would we apply them inside of a large corporation? And the good news is we have the tools. The bad news is you cannot just plop them into a existing company and expect that the antibodies don't immediately kind of like throw it back out. It's kind of like one of those cartoons. You shove it in the door and a minute later it comes sailing back over your head and going, well, what happened? Well, what happened is companies are in fact organized for execution, not for innovation. And if you just think you're going to paste startup techniques in without changing the culture, number one, and then changing the processes and procedures, all you're going to have is what I call innovation theater.